Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by who I sometimes affectionately and somewhat self-aggrandizingly refer to as the young lions of the Institute, Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you?
Roar. If you guys haven't seen, Sihlan Gubesi, our colleague at Big Daddy Liberty, has this great line where he says people are calling him a terrifying kind of free marketeer or something. And so now he roars. He goes, wow. Show how terrifying he is.
That reminds me, you should go check out his interview with James Lindsay that was done on the YouTube channel last night, I think.
Yeah.
Check that up, Big Daddy Liberty YouTube.
I just watched it. It's very good.
Yeah. Good stuff. And of course, we also are joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you?
I'm well. I am well, in the sense that my lighting is quite stark. It's a desperate attempt of me to, just seem less white than I really am.
Fantastic. All right. Let's get stuck into the news.
Malevich, it's a Malevich painting.
Yes.
Malevich's famous painting, White on White. It was just a white canvas. Sold for millions.
I'm just
good work.
Putting that on my TV now. Is my one colleague once compared me to a really, really expensive but really plain painting.
Okay, here we go.
This is why episodes with you guys are the best. Anyway, what can we talk about today as a first story? Except, of course, the greatest game of reverse card Uno I've ever seen in the real world. And that is the ANC announced after the 30-day period had elapsed, and there were some people who were somewhat skeptical that Ace Magashule would be suspended, myself amongst them. And yet, suspended he was. The ANC put out a statement saying, as he has refused to step aside, as per our resolution at the National Executive Committee, we will ask him, we will no longer be asking him, we will now be telling him that he is suspended pending further investigations and developments with the corruption case and allegations against him. But as many expected, Ace did not go quietly into the night, and he said, no, guys. You're not suspending me. I'm suspending you. And so he released a letter last night saying that as General Secretary of the ANC, which is his position, he's rescinding his own suspension and suspending President Cyril Ramaphosa in connection to allegations relating to his funding of his CR17 campaign against Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma in 2017. Quite exciting stuff. The ANC has responded, or at least some of the Cyril faction have responded by saying that his letter and renouncing of his suspension and his suspension of Cyril has no water and no standing, and that he can't do this, and that he backdated the letter to before his own suspension. And now the ANC put out a statement through its spokesperson, Paul Mabe, which said, the ANC notes the letter written by Secretary General Comrade Ace Magashule to President of the ANC, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa. The decisions of the National Executive Committee and National Working Committee stand. The National Executive Committee will be meeting over the weekend and will accordingly respond to the Secretary General. The ANC requests that the Secretary General respect the decisions of the NEC and subject himself to the discipline of the organization. Now, some people are beginning to say, particularly from the Cyril Ramaphosa camp, that Ace Magashule has actually made things worse for himself here because he will now be kicked out of the party, not just suspended and left to fight another day. So, Gabriel, let me start with you. What do you make of this? The story, is Ace finished? Is this a great tactical move? What's your take?
Okay, to get to the second bit first, let's just read the key sentence from Magashule's letter to just enjoy the language here. In terms of the ANC constitution, my suspension is thus wholly suspended until my appeal has been heard and its final outcome announced. I really like suspending the suspension.
It's poetry. It's beautiful.
I can see a picture of Ace in like suspender braces, hanging from a suspension bridge, declaring the suspension suspended. So I think, look, here's a small detail. Bloomberg is the only publication that I found which has actually quoted directly from the original suspension letter. And the key point there is that the original suspension letter was served on May 3rd, or rather said, as of May 3rd, you are suspended. So it might have even been sent before that. This matters because the suspension of Ace only became a news topic on May 6th, on the Wednesday. So there's this 2-day delay, which shows that as much as the ANC is sort of seen as a leaky sieve, it can hold on to big news like that for 2 days. Also, what's interesting, just by the by, because Bloomberg mentions this, it says, and this has been really good for the rand, and this has been really good for South African bonds, with a 2 percentage point increase, let's say, in bond prices, and therefore 2 basis point drop in bond yields. That happened on Monday. In other words, that happened after the letter was sent, but 2 days before anyone in South Africa's official space knew about it. So I strongly suspect, on this basis, although I couldn't say who, that there's been some insider bond trading going on around this news, which is an aspect of the story that I very much doubt anyone else is going to look into, because their time is going to be overwhelmed by hearing people say that this shows that the ANC is, as the phoenix from the ashes, reborn, that Ramaphosa, the reformer, has proven himself. Now, this is a very interesting thesis, and one that can be broken down in a few ways. Yes.
As Adrian Basson from News 24 said, corruption has been defeated by Cyril Ramaphosa.
And he was majestic. He was majestic. I mean, I still can't get over Basson describing Ramaphosa as majestic a year ago. I do apologize.
Yeah. Well, Peter Bruce called him a technical genius 2 years ago. We all have a lot to recover from. Now, before putting off the wrong impression, I want to say that I think it's very good news that Ace was suspended. I think it's very good news that he's trying to fight back in this overtly juvenile way. I think it is making explicit that which has been implicit for so long, which is apparently a major project of the ANC, and good on them for doing that. What is now explicit is that it doesn't get along with itself and that there are major ructions at the top. Yeah, and so I and my friends, we gathered around, we made a braaivleis, we had some wine, and we toasted 1 day's worth of good news in South Africa. And I think that is important. It comes so rarely that one must enjoy it and take it for the win that it is. It is not, however, the defeat of corruption. And basically the point to make here is a very old-fashioned point, that humans are fallen angels, that we're neither perfectly good nor perfectly evil. And that to a large measure, our performance is determined by the incentives that we live by. So if you're in a position where if you tell the truth, you're going to get punished, and if you lie, you get rewarded, after a while, that's going to probably be what you end up doing. Either that, or you're going to tell the truth and then get punished so badly that you get removed. There are certain parties that work that way. There are certain gangs in which if you don't murder someone or whatever, then you'll get kicked out. Incentive structures. The youth call this the systemic analysis, but really it's a very old-fashioned way of looking at things. And usually when people hear about systems, I think they get put off because the only system that ever really gets talked about in the mainstream is called white monopoly capital, and it's that system which is to blame for everything that's wrong in the world. Now, no one has given a satisfactory explanation of how that system works today, to my mind, but there is a system called cadre deployment. It is overt. It has an ideological goal. It was presided over by Ramaphosa directly as the head of the cadre deployment committee. It's always been presided over by the ANC, and it remains sort of under, I suppose, the executive's authority. And that system programs for the kind of corruption that we've been seeing. So you can replace one corrupt chap. Firstly, there's still lots around. And secondly, you'll just reproduce corrupt people. You'll, in fact, incentivize average people who might be good and might be bad into becoming corrupt people, as long as you keep the system in place. And it's the failure to address that system, which I think is really what should make us continue to worry going forward, and worry especially that good toast that we had yesterday of celebration will turn into something ugly, turn into a distraction, and turn Ace Magashule again into a very old-fashioned idea, a scapegoat, that embodiment of guilt which the village can gather around and shellac and tar and feather and drive out of town, and then declare that evil has been expunged from our village. And here we go. We're going to have a wonderful new dawn, well systematized to incentivize just more of the same.
Exactly, and it's sort of on that point that I want to direct my question to you, Hermann. So I agree with Gabriel completely. When you see someone who's corrupt going down and getting into a sticky situation, it's almost always a good thing. It's a good thing to celebrate, and I think we should definitely take a toast there, because Ace Magashule is a guy who definitely deserves to be put, I think, probably on trial, and from the evidence that we have publicly available, go to jail for the allegations against him. But the real question is, as affects the lives of South Africans, is this system that Gabriel just talked about, are things going to change? Is Cyril Ramaphosa, now that he's free from the Ace faction, presumably now that he's free from the Ace faction, of course Ace is still claiming that he suspended Ramaphosa, is there going to be great economic reform coming down the road which will lift the living standards of South Africans across the board?
No, next question. The systematization that Gabriel talks about, without being cynical or repeating things that we've said earlier, the problem with the ANC is it really is, let's be charitable and divide it into the people that want to take your money and spend it for the greater good, and the people who want to take your money and spend it for their own good. If we are going to be kind and we're going to say that 50% of the ANC are actual ideologues who believe that the National Democratic Revolution, a command economy, a socialist state, will be to the benefit of South Africa, the problem is it still is, at the point of contact with the citizen, it's very much the same. Is, you work for money, they take it and do something that you weren't planning on doing with it. So the real tragedy, without trying to be, sound bitey or pithy, is that the ANC is at best divided between people who want to steal your money and people who want to take your money. And that is what systematizes this thing, because on the one hand, if they have noble ideological intentions, they still systematize or entrench the taking of the citizens' money for the purposes of the greater good. That's destructive. In the case of Ace Magashule, it's taking of the citizens' money for their own good. And the real problem here is both corruption and ideology, but one precedes the other in terms of its potency. I think I said this on the previous episode I was on. If government's going to be the biggest spender, it's going to be the biggest looter. That is the natural progression of, the fallenness of power. So the problem we have here is this corruption thing. Yes, someone corrupt might now face consequences. That's good, but it's not a sea change. I don't think you should dress it up as a sea change in the fight against corruption. The only thing that will really turn the tide in corruption is if the large amounts of money going to the state with this systematized and perversely incentivized way of, skimming off the top at every level of government and state, if that is removed root and tree through a system of, letting taxpayers keep their own money, and through systems of making state tax-funded support more driven by the choices of those people who need help than the state deciding who should get help, which help, and when. But I think I want to add a toast here to Nelson Mandela, because I think he might not have seen it in this light, but Nelson Mandela did South Africa a massive favor by stepping down as president of the ANC and as president of the country after his first term in the union buildings. What he did on a constitutional national level is assure the world that there's a voluntary, peaceful, democratic handover of power, that there isn't a Robert Mugabe 2.0 in South Africa, that the constitution is taken seriously enough. And that was important, I think, especially from a market confidence perspective then. But what it ensured was that the leadership of the ANC would always at some point be up for grabs. It isn't a dictatorial system where when the old king dies, only then you will get conniving for the succession. Because Mandela abandoned the role he held so securely within the ANC, voluntarily, he entrenched factionless divisions within the ANC. And it is due to that entrenched factionalism, the fact that power in the ANC is up for grabs, that you do see the skullduggery. And if you look at the gradual weakening of power positions in the ANC, Mandela, undisputed, unassailable, very powerful. Mbeki, slightly weaker, removed after he had lost the presidency of the ANC, and going on to Zuma, very similar circumstances. But at every step of the way, you see the power entrenchment at the top of the ANC being weaker and weaker. If at this point you can have a system where you can have a he said situation, and it's not quite clear who has the ANC mandate. So overall, the division and the ambition stoked into the fire of the ANC soul by Mandela voluntarily giving up that position is now ensuring that we see a weakened ANC. Because say what you will, Ramaphosa might win this, Magashule might win this, but the fact is this is a weakened ANC. It is a weak organization that can endure this type of nonsense. Imagine if you or I were to, write a letter suspending France. The institution will go, lol, that's very cute, but go on sick leave, you need it. Because institutionally, the strength of leadership and where power lies is just so clear. The fact that the ANC cannot have that clarity is a good sign, because it shows that an apex predator is slowly becoming older and older and older. But now it really is over to South Africans to, fill the void of what comes after this apex predator.
That's definitely a $5 thesis. And Gabriel, you have a very grim look on your face. So I'm curious as to if you have any thoughts about the thesis Hermann just laid out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Definitely a lot of truth to it. I do think that sort of watching the news of the morning, it's been hard. Tony Ngeni's been on all of the stations. News anchors trying to gin up this I suspend you suspend me as a genuine sort of confrontation of equals, such that Cyril Ramaphosa might in fact be suspended, have struggled to find anyone in the ANC excepting for Tony Ngeni, himself one of the few people who's actually been to jail for corruption, to stand up for Magashule and to stand against Cyril Ramaphosa. So my view is rather that Ramaphosa is that, I completely agree. Mandela set a kind of president, and Mbeki and Zuma were in weaker positions. My reading is that Ramaphosa is in much the same position as them, that his power is unassailable right now, even though lots of people in the party disagree with him because he's so early in his term. And the real question is, will he get to have a third term as ANC president when a new national president is elected? Or will he be sort of leaving both more or less at the same time? Or will he be withdrawn early as Zuma was done and as Mbeki was done? So we'll see about that. I think that it is an interesting challenge for the Ramaphosa supporter to explain how they reconcile their position. Their position had always been, look, Ramaphosa is great, basically perfect. The country's not going very well. The reason for that is Ramaphosa has no power. Both of his hands are tied behind his back. The Ace faction is so much on the edge of a knife. Ramaphosa couldn't get the votes at the NEC to expel someone like Magashule. Therefore, he's just got to swim in this den of snakes and see what he can make of it. Mm-hmm. Now that he's gotten rid of Magashule, I think read the papers very carefully this Sunday and next to find the Ramaphosa's explanation of why now it was possible, but it wasn't possible in 2018. I'm curious to see what justification could possibly be given for that. Very, very curious, and I'll be looking, and we can come back and talk about that. But my last point is that while I certainly agree with Hermann that the ANC is more split than ever, basically, factionally, ideologically, or in terms of policy, which is really the point of contact for the citizen.
Yes.
The policy is completely the same. And it'll be very interesting to see, once you get rid of the leader, supposedly, of the radical economic transformation faction, well, then how do you explain the ANC's radical economic transformation policies? Once Magashule is gone, who is it exactly that is championing expropriation without compensation? Because so far, it's always been Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes, and I think who made the point that the fascinating thing about South African politics is that the official opposition is in the presidency. And now that the official opposition has had this coup, and you can't, as Gabriel said, you can't say it is both a coup and the official opposition is still the presidency, the good guy, the noble underdog fighting for what is right. So I must say that's a very good point Gabriel makes, is who is now going to be the villain? Who's the boogeyman? Because Magashule is such a good boogeyman. Like, really, he is the perfect fodder to Ramaphosa's perceived, knightly, chivalrous
majesty.
intentions.
Yeah, I don't know, guys. I think it's obvious that by sending a single email, Magashule has deposed the president and re-established the entire order of South Africa around him as this new supreme executive. I'm joking, of course. I think you're completely correct. I think Ramaphosa has shown that he's strong. And yeah, I suspect what will probably happen is another boogeyman will be created. But there's this member of the NEC who doesn't agree with him, and that's the reason why he can't move against expropriation without compensation. And we're going to keep going down that road until, maybe they'll say, it's the membership, it's the NC's membership that's against, that won't allow him to reform.
I must say something
which is not true based off of polling that we've seen.
Yes, I mean, yeah. But a very interesting thing that Anthea Jeffrey always points out is that the NDR is always willing to sacrifice the goat of a Sarsel when it's necessary. And it's interesting that there was a sort of consensus that Zuma had to go because he was such a significant obstacle for the NDR progressing into the 2019 elections. What is interesting for me is that the consensus is for the NDR to move forward is becoming more difficult in identifying, or more challenging in identifying that scapegoat. And that's the real dynamic that I'm interested in here.
All right. So we went quite long on that topic. I think we'll just do one more today, and that is a story about Eskom. So, of course, we all hate load shedding, and the government says, no, wait, we've got the solution to load shedding. We're going to get some massive ships with gas-powered turbines on them. And they're going to park off of South Africa's shore, and they're going to feed large amounts of electricity, a couple thousand megawatts, into the South African grid, and this will provide an extra cushion to avoid load shedding. But some concerns have been raised. Some companies involved, some individuals involved suggested that there was conflicts of interest, that there were accusations that the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Natasha, I think, might be in some way connected to this. I don't think there's been proof of that yet, but those allegations have been made. Eskom itself has said that it's not really keen on this program. It says that some sources in Eskom told Bloomberg in a report that they didn't really want to buy electricity from these Turkish power ships because they think that the contract is too long and too expensive, and Eskom's already in so much financial trouble that this is just going to make things worse. It's worth noting that the deal to buy power from these power ships, which will provide 1,220 megawatts of electricity, is 20 years. And, that's quite an investment. So the DA on the committee called for the committee to vote for an investigation into the assigning of this contract. The ANC said no. So it seems to be going ahead now. It's been approved by the parliamentary committee. And I think we'll go forward through the parliamentary process now. The deal is worth as much as 218 billion rand over its 2-decade duration. And this is according to an estimate from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. So Hermann, I'll start with you. What do you make of this? Is this really a great idea for how to get us out of the load shedding problem in the short term? Which is, I think, what this is. Well, it's kind of weird, right? Because this is kind of being sort of sold as a bit of a short-term solution to the Eskom problem, and yet it's going to go on for 20 years, the contract. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really does ask that question of, how short is short. But what I find fascinating about this is, well, obviously, to answer your question, no, this is a terrible solution. There are far better alternatives in terms of independent power provision, the fixing of some of Eskom's fundamental failures. The unbundling of Eskom would be quite useful. And in the research, I think it was Andrew Kenny that did the research for the IRR, recommending some fundamental restructuring processes and also just simple things like hiring people on merit. If we're looking at short-term things, I think an often implied criticism of free market solutions is that it's this trickle-down effect, that it takes time, that it needs to trickle and so on. But if you look at what happened in the last year with people, just with a whole new industry of masks and sanitization step-on taps and all those things developing quite quickly because just, there was this immediate sort of crisis demand for it. I suspect that if the market is allowed to function more like a market, and if Eskom just takes a step back, makes independent power provision possible, at whatever scale, you will see inventors and entrepreneurs and business people stepping up to fill that gap, as we've seen them doing over the last year with the basic stuff like hand sanitizer and things like that. So if we're looking for a good short-term solution, then no, a 20-year contract isn't the solution. Then no, 200+ billion rands of taxpayer money isn't the solution. The solution really, and it is painfully simple, is to open up the market. Now, it is a more complex thing than just say, it's a free market in electricity. The grid is something that needs to be managed with some stability. And, some people say, just put power back onto the grid. It's not as simple as that. But what is relatively simple is to make it easier for large-scale electricity production off-grid, independent of the dominant grid as it currently is, or with some limitations that you can't, transfer electricity back onto the grid in a sort of debit-credit system. That is complex, and I understand that. But if we're looking for a solution that can kick in sooner rather than later, my goodness, a Turkish technology from the middle of the 20th century really isn't the best solution.
Gabriel, in 90 seconds, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think these offshore ships have a lot going for them in terms of cost per megawatt. They can be a lot cheaper than a lot of the independent power produced in South Africa, which is often produced in very green ways. I think that the two things to separate are whether or not something like this is a good idea, maybe 5 years and maybe from a different supplier or whatever, and maybe 10 years versus the process. In other words, distinction between the outcome and the process. Now, my mind is open about the outcome. It might be that something like this is the kind of thing that a free market would produce. But the process is what really worries me. I can't be sure of anything like that unless I have a clear sense of this tender having been awarded to the best company for the job. And that is where the allegations lie, that cheaper companies, more reliable companies that would have offered much more favorable terms did not get the bid, and that the reasons for that are now not going to be investigated. And that suggests kickbacks, ideology, all kinds of graft getting between the best possible outcome, whatever that is, and I'm open to whatever it is, and reality. So especially when it comes to government purchases, the reasons for those purchases ought to be perfectly clear, because we are, after all, the shareholders. Eskom is often said to have one shareholder, but really it has 58 million. And I think we deserve to know exactly why the tender went this way and not to a competitor, or some other format. There should be a proper cost-benefit analysis that's digestible enough for a simpleton like me to understand, but also complex enough to be scrutinized by engineers at the highest level and economists. And that's just not on the table, not even close.
Right. I think one of the things that also concerns me, and this is going back to the sort of solution thing, is I really haven't seen that much from government, and maybe I'm just ignorant, I completely admit to that, as to what the long-term plan really to fix load shedding definitively is. This project, regardless of its cost and all that, it's only 1,200 megawatts, which is, I'd much rather have that on the grid than not. And that can be the difference between level 2 and level 1, or level 1 and level 0. But it doesn't seem like a long-term solution here. So if this is, and the fact that this deal has been thought of as being a 20-year one, makes me think that government is a very long way from solving the problem. Anyway, I think that's all the time we have for today. I know that this could have continued into quite an interesting discussion, but we don't have time. So thank you very much for listening. We will see you next week. Remember to support the Institute of Race Relations by SMSing your name to 32823, and we'll see you on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Cheers.